I'm Becky L. McCoy, and you're listening to Stories of Unfolding Grace, the podcast about grace during unexpected times. You'll hear from real people dealing with hard stuff, and I hope you'll feel encouraged that you can bravely live through hard stuff too. Hey friends, this week I'm chatting with Tracey Casciano. This is one of those episodes that you're going to want to listen to when there aren't younger people around, because it's about her story of growing up in an abusive family. So here's my conversation with Tracey. I'm here today with Tracey Casciano. She is the author of Out of the Darkroom, Into the Light. And Tracey, why don't you share a little bit with us about, I guess it's basically what your book is about, but also this particularly challenging, difficult, horrible season of your life.
Well, thank you very much for having me this evening.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to share. My book is my personal journey from faith to forgiveness after a life of child abuse. And I share my story because for many, many years, I kept it to myself because I thought I was the only one that had this kind of upbringing or past, and was too scared and I guess you would say prideful to share, my past with anyone.
Yeah.
And so I realized that I am not the only one with this story, and thought that it would be helpful for others to see the hope and healing that came out of my story.
I mean, I don't know how much detail you like to go into when you share your story, but can you just share a little bit with us to kind of understand what did your childhood look like?
I was raised in a dysfunctional family. I was an only child, and my mom was an alcoholic. And my father sexually abused me starting at about the age of 10. And it went on for about three years. And my mom knew about it, but didn't do anything about it. And though the abuse stopped, the guilt and shame and fear never did. And I, was able to get through life by just pretending that everything was fine. Mm-hmm. So I put on this mask that my life was completely normal and everything was great, although it was far from normal.
Yeah. So how did you react emotionally? You mentioned a couple things.
Like I said, when I was going through it and living it, I had no idea that other people might possibly have this kind of situation going on in their home.
Yeah.
So I was really scared and embarrassed and didn't want any of my friends or anybody around me to find out. So I did my best to hide it. And it was when I got older that I started to realize that I couldn't really hide my past. When I was married for about a year, my husband had known my parents for about 4 years. And it wasn't until we'd been married a year that I finally told him. And that was kind of the breaking point. I had never told anyone before that.
Wow.
And that, when I saw his reaction, I realized, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
It really scared me because, like I said, I had tried my whole life to hide this, and I didn't want anything to change. And he was so angry and upset. And I could tell immediately that this was going to change everything.
Yep.
And so I was really, really scared and wondered, why did I tell him? I made the wrong choice. So it was from that time forward that the false act that I had put on for so long with my parents kind of started to fall apart, because he could no longer act the same towards my parents as he had.
Yeah.
And so we became estranged, and it was a little bit easier because we lived on the East Coast and they moved to the West Coast about the same time. So suddenly it wasn't like we had this face-to-face connection all the time. So that did make it a little bit easier. But emotionally, it was exhausting because I had all these negative feelings towards them. But anytime it was a birthday or a holiday or something like that, I put my, smile back on and my fake act. Had these feelings of guilt, like, well, they are my parents, and, I have to really, just be nice and honor them. And so it was really difficult for me. And this went on for many, many years.
Did you feel like it was like your responsibility to keep the relationships going?
Yeah, and I think part of this whole thing, a big part of my personality is I never like any kind of conflict.
Yeah.
So the last thing I ever wanted to do was confront it.
Right.
And it wasn't until my father died that I realized this is affecting every part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do this anymore. And because like I said, I was an only child, I was suddenly responsible for my mother. She had a stroke. And my dad took care of her. So suddenly my dad was gone and I was left with my mom. And so it was during that time that I really realized, I need to face this and figure this out. And so that's when this book came about, because I started seeing a Christian counselor, talking to her and telling her all of this. And she was the one that said, wow, she's like, you have quite a story. She said, would you ever consider sharing this with anyone? And I thought she was crazy, because I was thinking to myself, I didn't even want to tell you.
Right. In this private room.
Right. And so I actually got a little bit angry that she even suggested it, but it was one of those things, it was like this nagging question that I couldn't get rid of. And I didn't even know, what, I was like, well, I was talking to myself, I'm like, what is she talking about? What does she mean? Book or talk to people, but I couldn't get it out of my head because I kept thinking, what if there's one person out there that's struggling as I did for so many years and they could benefit from hearing my story?
Yeah. How do you think it would have changed the way that you handled it if you had found out that you weren't the only one experiencing that?
I think it would have changed everything, because I think I might have been braver and would have told someone. I just had no idea, and I didn't know what the ramifications would be if I told, because, I was kind of stuck. Okay, so do I tell on my dad, and then I'm left with my alcoholic mother who hits me?
Right.
I didn't know what could happen, and I wasn't sure. I'm like, what if he went to jail, or what if he, I didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And because they acted like nothing was wrong, I thought, well, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should just forget it.
Right. Oh, man. What did you struggle with the most?
I struggled with wanting to be loved. The attention that my father gave me was love, however, completely inappropriate. It was more love than I got from my mom, because it was a very negative, abusive relationship. And so I think that I struggled with that, because I would turn to my dad for love, but then I knew what that meant.
Oh my word, I can only imagine how confusing. And did you feel trapped?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was totally trapped. Like I said, I didn't think that I had anyone to turn to. And I was not a Christian. I was not raised with any kind of religion. So I knew about God. And I knew, because I used to go to church with some friends, like for a sleepover or something.
Uh-huh.
So I had heard of God,
Right.
but I didn't know him, and I didn't have a relationship, and I didn't really know how to pray. I mean, I clung on to the idea that there was a God and that somehow he would get me through this.
I get so excited to see people choosing to live bravely and authentically. Each week on Tuesdays and Fridays, I host a Facebook Live event to share more stories of people living bravely, and I want to hear your story too. Join us at facebook.com/Becky L. McCoy. I can only share so much with you here on the podcast, but you can read my story and learn more about living bravely and authentically at my blog, BeckyLMcCoy.com. Stop by and sign up to receive my monthly newsletter. It includes book recommendations and blog posts and podcast episodes you may have missed. Check the show notes for details. In what ways did you see grace? I'm using this definition of grace as when good things happen during really hard times or really bad times. And how did you see grace through all these during your childhood, but then also as an adult when you decided to come to terms with it?
In my childhood, I would say that I saw grace in that I was able to get through. You know, I never gave up. I never tried to hurt myself or anything like that. I hung on to hope. And so if you call that grace,
yeah,
that
absolutely.
Would definitely, I mean, the fact that I am who I am today and that I got to be a successful adult, despite everything that I went through, I would say that definitely is grace. And the fact that now my mom is in my life in a way that she never was before, that to me is very much grace.
Absolutely.
She does not smoke anymore. She doesn't drink. She lives in a assisted living facility about 15 minutes away from me, and she knows my kids. And so I would say that although our relationship is not perfect, it is much better than it ever really was.
So how do you, because I'm thinking about all the studies that talk about children who are abused in any number of ways grow up to either be abusers or just lead completely dysfunctional, unhealthy lives. And what do you think allowed you to not go down that path?
Finding a relationship with God, becoming a Christian definitely led me in the right direction. Understanding and embracing the idea of forgiveness. And that changed everything, because when I first heard about the idea of forgiveness, I was like, why would I ever forgive them?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. And it wasn't until I realized that by forgiving them, it doesn't let them off the hook for what they did.
Right.
It lets me off the hook.
Yep.
So all my anger and shame and guilt and everything that, I kind of hung on to and was bottled up inside of me was suddenly just gone, and it was wiped away. And I realized nothing was my fault. And that really helped a lot too. I mean, I can't really speak about the people that end up, repeating past mistakes.
Right.
I know, I've read the studies too, and it really saddens me that does happen a lot. but I know that the love that I received from my husband and the love and support we have from our church community and our friends has really shaped who we are as a couple and as parents. And we have a lot of positive help and love from John's parents as well. And so I think that all of that combined has, made us, I would say, good parents.
Yeah.
And, loving. And we have 4 children ourselves. So, and we're really proud of who they are and, encourage them and support them. And, the last thing I would ever want to do is raise a child to feel the way that I did.
Yeah, I can imagine that burden is pretty heavy to want to make sure that your kids know that they're loved.
And in some ways, I think you kind of go overboard the other way.
Right.
Because you're so scared of repeating that.
Yeah.
Like I was not raised in a home where we said, I love you.
Right.
I mean, you told someone you loved them if you thought they were dying.
Okay.
And that was it. And my kids, we say I love you all the time. And I think that's something that is really important to me. I started it when they were little because I wanted them to know.
Right.
I do love you, and I cherish you, and I wanted them to have that in their back pocket, so when times get tough or, they're all, my oldest is 19 and my youngest is 12. So I call them all, teenagers.
Right. Yeah.
And life can be pretty difficult when you're a teenager. And when tricky situations come up, I want them to know, my parents love me, and even if I make a mistake, I know they're still going to love me.
How do you feel as you've worked through all of this? How do you feel like now you're living more bravely and authentically?
Oh my goodness. Being able to come out with this book, tell my kids, and tell my friends was the most freeing thing that I've ever done.
Was it terrifying?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Literally the night before my book debut, I was panicked. I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Oh,
this
my gosh,
is a
I want to
mistake.
cancel everything.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, and I know that God wants me to do this. There were so many reasons, like I said, that I didn't think that I would do this, and I didn't know what it would look like. And anytime I doubted myself, I was a history teacher, and I remember just sitting here thinking, I can't write a book. Like, I don't even know where to start to write a book. And it was like I would turn the corner, and I would meet an author.
Wow.
Or, I would say, like, I don't even know where to start, whatever. And then I would get an email from somebody who was an editor.
Wow.
It was just crazy. It was just every time I turned around, it was like God was like, well, here's the resource you need. Yeah. And why don't you ask this person how they did it? And, it was, I seriously, every time I put up a roadblock, God was like, nope, here you go, and just open the door. And so I just was like, okay, I'm going to be obedient, and I'm going to do this the best I can, and I will know if I have, if this project comes out and, people respond to it. So that's really what got me over the fear. And of course, telling your friends, things like that, everybody was so supportive. Yeah, it's been a really amazing journey.
What would you say to encourage someone else who is dealing with a past of child abuse?
Don't give up. Find someone that you can tell, because once you open up and realize that none of this is your fault, it changes everything. And you don't get it until someone really looks at you, someone who cares about you, and says, you're a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And this stuff that has happened to you happened to you. It's not who you are. It's something that
and you
happened
didn't
to you.
cause it, and it's not okay.
And you can't process that until someone you just really trust and love tells you that.
Wow.
So that's what I would say. It's just, don't give up.
In that moment for you, when you told your husband and you had that realization, what was that feeling?
Oh, it was complete fear.
Yeah.
It was complete fear telling him.
And then after you told him, what did it feel like?
Then after I told him, it was relief. It was definitely relief because, there's nothing worse than holding on to a secret to your husband. So that was a big relief. But then I also was so nervous about, what does this mean? What does this mean for the future?
What's next? Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing this part of your story with us. I know that there are people out there that you may be the first person that has ever expressed a lot of the things that they're wrestling with on the inside. So I'm really thankful that you were brave enough to share with us. So before we go, I want to ask you a couple fun questions.
Okay.
So everybody can get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
So the first one is, what are you loving right now?
Oh, I am loving. Today was my first day of a new job.
Okay.
Like I mentioned earlier, I was a history teacher. I taught in public high school for 8 years.
Oh, awesome. I used to teach high school too.
So I took a year off to publish my book and focus on speaking and things like that. During that time, I realized I really missed being with kids and teaching kids. But I knew I needed to change. Mm-hmm. So here in Virginia, school starts the day after Labor Day. So, but today was the first day back for teachers. I'm in an elementary school. And it's so different, but I love it. It's the environment is different, the climate is different.
Yeah. And
so I'm really excited.
What's your favorite meal right now?
I'm a little bit obsessed with quinoa.
Okay.
Because I live a healthy lifestyle. I exercise pretty much every day. And so I'm big into protein, and I'm not a big meat eater. Mm-hmm. So I concentrate on other places that I can find protein.
Yep.
And I love quinoa. So,
it is awesome.
That's probably my answer.
Okay, so here's my favorite quinoa dish. Actually, I think I've shared it on the podcast before, but it's so good that it needs to be shared regularly. So you make a batch of quinoa. Oh, actually, I'll give you two. The first one, you roast a bunch of vegetables, and then you throw it on top of the quinoa with some Greek yogurt and hummus and Asiago cheese. So good.
Yum.
So good. And then the other one, you brown some onions in a pan and then cook it with chicken and apple sausage or something like that. And then toss it in the quinoa with some feta or some other really tart cheese like that. Oh my word. Mm-hmm. So good. You can scramble really eggs in with it and eat it all day long. It's glorious.
And my kids would probably like that too.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
They're funny. I've kind of tricked them. They can't tell the difference. Well, they get confused between couscous and quinoa.
Right.
And they know they like couscous.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, oh, look at this new couscous I got.
It's all couscous, yeah.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I trick them sometimes.
What are you doing to take care of yourself?
Well, like I said, I exercise a lot, and I don't just do it because, of the physical benefits. I do it because for me, it's emotionally, it helps me stay mentally healthy. It's a huge stress reliever for me. If I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed, if I take a 30-minute run, I'm like a different person.
Yeah.
And my kids know it too. They'll say, if I'm freaking out, house is a mess, da, da, da. And I start laying into everybody. They're like, Mom, why don't you go for a run and we'll clean up? That means they're not really going to clean up, but they just want me to leave. And
Right.
they know when I get back, I will
you
be a
need
little
to
bit
get
more
out of the
sane.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really do take care of myself in that way.
That's great. That gives me hope, because right now going for a run means like packaging up snacks and children in a stroller, and like it's this big
It's hard.
time consuming thing that is just as much work as benefit, and so some days it's not worth it.
When my kids were little, because I've always liked exercise, it's just something.
Yeah.
It becomes addictive.
Yeah.
When I was young, I was on swim team, and I love that feeling of the endorphins afterwards. And so when my kids were little, because I know exactly. I mean, I had 4, but I joined a gym with free daycare.
Right.
And honestly, if they said 2-hour max, I was there for 2 hours.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe not exercising the whole time. I would bring a magazine. I would take a nice long shower. I would shave.
Right. But to have that time, that's a good idea.
Absolutely.
And my last question for you is, what are you doing to be brave?
Sharing my story is still scary. Especially, I've had the opportunity to, speak in front of different groups of women, and on shows like this. I've been on a couple TV shows, and every time it's scary, and it makes me feel very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But I know that other people are receiving my message and finding hope in it, and that's what keeps me doing it and keeps me brave. Is that I just keep telling myself, you know what, this isn't about me anymore. Mm-hmm. This is about other people finding the message of hope and forgiveness, and realizing, God's gift of grace to us is such a wonderful example.
Well, thanks so much. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. While you're there, please rate, review, and share Stories of Unfolding Grace. When you give it 5 stars, it goes a huge way in helping other people find the podcasts by increasing my ranking. If you're interested in sharing your own story of unfolding grace, head to my blog, beckylmccoy.com/submissions. I can't wait to hear from you.
Next week, I'll be talking with Sarah Rickey about infant loss and her experience grieving as a mom. I can't believe that it's going to be episode 28. There are only 3 episodes left in the season, and then I'm going to take a break for a little bit. Thank you guys for being so encouraging and so faithful in listening and cheering each other on in our own stories of unfolding grace.
Thanks again for joining me. I'm looking forward to next week.